Now look, I don't want to suggest that Rolls-Royce is slow, but if it's taking you 123 years to build a car, seriously, what's going on? And yet, by its own admission, this spectacular and fantastically expensive new Rolls-Royce, the Spectre, is the vehicle that one of the company's founders, Charles Rolls, said he wanted to build in 1900. That's when he said that he thought the perfect Rolls-Royce would be electric, because it is clean, it is silent, it doesn't smell bad, and it's got lots of power. He predicted that it would work, as long as there was something called charging infrastructure. We'll get there one day. And so finally it's here. Charles would be pleased. This is the Spectre, the world's first electric super luxury coupe. And I know what you're thinking, a Rolls-Royce that's electric? This is a company that's famous for its V12 engines. How can this be happening? Well, kind of because it has to happen, as we all know. In fact, Rolls-Royce said it will be completely electric by 2030. But actually it also makes a bit of sense, because Rolls-Royces have always been about quiet, effortless motoring. And nothing says quiet and effortless like a EV with 750 kilos of battery. But it also makes sense for the owners, because they're the kind of people who don't drive very far because they have private jets and helicopters. Could this enormous monster then be the ultimate EV? Perhaps even one Elon Musk would buy. And in terms of design, there's so much that I love about this car, particularly this wheel. This is a 23-inch wheel, the largest wheel ever fitted to a Rolls-Royce, and one of the largest wheels I've ever seen. It's one of those things that car designers put on a concept car, and they love big wheels. They look great in drawings, but the designer of this car said to me today, look, I actually got to use the wheel. He also spent a spectacular amount of time in a wind tunnel. In fact, they spent 820 hours just on this, the Spirit of Ecstasy. Now, you might not think she looks any different, but her wings had to be gently clipped and changed in shape so that she wouldn't cause a vortex over the front of the car. They worked on this again and again and again to get it right, because getting the lowest coefficient of drag of this car was so important for an electric vehicle, so you could get the kind of range that you need in a car like this. And they're claiming a range of 530 kilometres, which is pretty impressive, particularly for something this large. Getting that drag coefficient, which is 0.25, an amazing figure for this car, is also helped by the fact that the grille no longer needs to cool anything inside the car. So they could put the blades in a position that helped the air go over the car, around those enormous wheels and down to the back, and provide the right amount of lift and downforce the whole time. And as a bonus, the grille next to these fantastic DRLs looks epic. Now, what's interesting with the design is that they didn't go to a lot of trouble to make it look like an electric vehicle. I asked them why not, and they said, well, we want people to say, there goes a Rolls-Royce, not there goes an electric vehicle. And then if you're lucky enough to get inside, you might say to the owner, wow, this is quiet, and he'll say, yeah, I bought an electric vehicle. But they don't want to shout about it. So I find the front of the car very interesting, very modern. I have to say, it falls apart a bit at the back for me. This part looks less modern, but the designer told me I'm completely wrong, and he said that the back of the car is more modern than the front, which just shows that even a very expensive, well-paid designer can be wrong, because I must be right. But this is the tail light, which they say they've made as narrow as you can get away with homologation. It's as small as it can be, giving this wide, expansive hull look. And apparently the tail light's also meant to reflect the grille at the front, the Pantheon grille. And I'll give him that. That's not so bad. Overall, though, I'm giving the car about a 9 out of 10 for design, so he hasn't stuffed up too much. You might call this an interior, but Rolls-Royce call it a cosseting art space. Art, you say? Well, there's nice timber and all this stuff that ting-tings, but they say a work of art is the starlight roof. And it is a work of art, the way they weave the optic fibres through the roof to make the stars, the way it has shooting stars that go across at night, and the fact that you can have it set up to look the way the sky did on the day you were born, or whatever other constellation you like. Apparently people in Australia quite often go for the Southern Cross, which is not in so many of the Rolls-Royces bought in the world, because most of them go to the Northern Hemisphere, and in fact the vast majority go to the United States, which is possibly why we're here in Napa driving through wonderful vineyards and so on. The luscious interior is meant to be an example of automotive haute couture, meaning handmade and stupidly expensive. It all sounds a bit over the top until you sit in it and discover that it really does feel beyond special. And on the point of whether that represents value, well, not to me personally, but certainly the huge number of orders Rolls claims to have been hit by suggests otherwise. You do get a lot of car for your money, of course, because the Spectre is vast and weighs almost 3 tons, and there's no doubt that the interior is nicer than most people's houses, or even the nicest hotel you've ever seen, and that the top-notch umbrellas hidden in each door are a wonderful touch. One of the nifty and unexpected features the Spectre offers is a Rolls-Royce sound, which you can toggle on and off. With the fake noise off, the car is freakishly quiet. Apparently during testing they achieved a level of EV silence so incredible that people found it disturbing and described it as being like locked in solitary confinement. So the engineers had to put some natural sound back in. But with that Rolls-Royce sound on, you get the most subtle of guttural sounds. Every other car company so far has gotten this fake noise thing wrong with their electric vehicles, but Rolls has nailed it with the Spectre. It's just loud enough, but suitably restrained as well. For all the details on pricing and features, check out my written review at carsguide.com.au. If you're looking for the modern EV style interior in the Rolls, you can forget it, because they said they didn't want any of that funky stuff in the Spectre, so no giant screens in here. Indeed, I switched into a Rolls-Royce Ghost at one stage to be driven somewhere, and the interior is almost exactly the same, as was the silence, funnily enough, although the new car gets a more modern, fully digital dash. There's plenty of room for water bottles and oddment storage, and the sense of space for the driver and front passenger is suitably grand. But the rear seats are really for spoilt teenagers rather than Rolls owners. They're not uncomfortable at all, but they just feel a bit squeezed. You wouldn't ask to be chauffeured in a Spectre. Clearly this is a Rolls-Royce you'd choose to drive yourself. The boot is wide, deep and long with a volume of 380 litres. The Spectre has 2 separately excited synchronous motors, one on each axle for seamless all-wheel drive. The front motor makes 190 kilowatts and 365 newton meters, while they've sensibly sent more grunt to the rear, which gets 360 kilowatts and 710 newton meters. Either motor on its own would be enough to power a normal car. The total figures are 430 kilowatts and 900 newton meters, which is supercar-like. The battery is made up of 804 cells and weighs 700 kilograms. It has a net capacity of 102 kilowatt hours, and the designers used it as a sound deadening agent for road noise because it's just so massive. The Spectre can hit 100 kilometers an hour in 4.5 seconds, which feels very fast indeed, when you're piloting something that weighs 2,890 kilos and is more than 5.5 meters long. Welcome to the lap of luxury. I'm thinking of moving here. It's wonderful. Now, let me tell you about a cool little feature for this car. This thing weighs about 3 tons, 750 kilos of which is battery. Then there are these coach doors, which I reckon weigh about half a ton each. So obviously I'm not going to reach out and open that because I'm a Rolls-Royce owner, I have sensitive hands. There's a button here that I could do it with, but I'm too lazy for that. So they've introduced a feature where all I have to do is just put my foot on the brake, I'm ready to drive, and the door shuts. It's marvellous. And I put on my indicator. Now I'm hoping you can hear it because the sound of that indicator is magnificent. And apparently it was designed to sound like ice rolling around a very expensive whiskey glass, because how Rolls-Royce is that? Rolls-Royce also talks about the ting-ting in this car, which is a feeling you get, or the sound that you feel when you tap the metal bits of the car, like these vents. Now apparently the vents on each side are different. So if you tap them and you've got girls' fingernails, you can play a tune. Unfortunately, my fingernails aren't long enough for that. So this is, of course, the first electric vehicle from Rolls-Royce. And it's the first of many because they promised that all of their vehicles will be fully electric by 2030, which is a fast turnaround. So this is a very important car for them. But does an EV work for a company that's built its reputation on big, thrusting, powerful V12 engines? Well, surprisingly, yes. When I drove out for this event, I was in the back of a Rolls-Royce Ghost for a couple of hours, and it occurred to me when I got to the end of that journey that I never heard the engine of that car once. That's the whole thing with a Rolls-Royce. Power without any of that kind of abrasive noise. In fact, Rolls-Royce is built on 3 pillars. They are effortlessness, waftability, and silence. Now, effortlessness is all about torque, the feeling that if you put your foot down even a little bit, you will surge away into the scenery. And definitely a V12 delivers on that. They've nailed that kind of feeling that you get from a V12. The torque is there, the instant sensation, but also the silence. Waftability, in case you can't work it out from the sound of it, is the ability to just ride over bumps as if they weren't there. This Rolls-Royce, as usual, delivers on that in spades. They point out that other electric cars aren't good because they use the battery at the bottom of the car to give a low centre of gravity, but there's too much torsional twist at the front and rear around where the battery is, so you don't get the purity of handling that they were after. Of course, they've spent billions of hours and trillions of dollars on making theirs better than that. So this thing should be able to drive like a sports car. What I find interesting about making a super luxury coupe as their first electric vehicle is they chose for it to be a driver's car. Now you have to think that Rolls-Royces are of two kinds. They're either the kind that you drive yourself or the kind you sit in the back of. For this coupe, why do you put your kids in the back? You wouldn't do that to yourself. And you're not going to be driven around by a chauffeur in a car like this. So they wanted it to be driven. And that means it needs to be impressive. And it is. This thing is massive. 23-inch wheels. The width of the thing. The spirit of ecstasy in front of you. The bonnet looks the size of a barn door. But it actually shrinks onto the road. We're on very narrow roads here in Napa. Very windy roads. And it just doesn't feel intimidating. The steering is so light, as Rolls-Royce likes to point out, you can just use your fingers to drive it. And it's so effortless. They're again one of the core pillars. And it kind of makes sense, the electric thing, because in any Rolls-Royce you've always just put it in gear, one gear, just like an electric car, and there's no sense in previous rollers that there's any gearbox at all anyway. So the sense of just being one gear, one acceleration all the time, one effortless thrust of torque, it's kind of like Rolls-Royce core values. It's a pillar. This is kind of the car they've always wanted to make, I guess, because unlike anything else that costs this much money and has wheels, noise is just never a factor in a Rolls-Royce. In fact, they do everything they can to get rid of it. So, other than the fake noise, this thing is freakishly quiet. I like the steering, I like the way it handles, and another thing that's really shocked me is how much I like the B mode, the brake mode or the regeneration mode. They call it recuperation at Rolls-Royce because they're posh like that. But in this car, on a winding bit of road, I quite like the fact that you can just ease off the throttle, the nose tips in a little bit, there's a bit of regen braking, and you can just cruise along. You can also come to a complete stop without touching the brakes, and something I learned from a chauffeur the other day, you can pull off a proper champagne stop. Now there are three kinds of stop. There's a whiskey stop, when you brake too hard and the car does that, ooh, ah. You won't spill your whiskey though, because there's only a little bit in the glass. Then there's a gin and tonic stop, where it rattles the glass a little bit. It's not awful. They hopefully won't spill it. Again, it's not too full. But a champagne stop, well, you don't want to spill any of that stuff because it's worth $1 million a drop. So you have to come to a stop that is completely still and without any rocking of the car. Now, I tried to do that a few times today using the brakes, and it wasn't easy. But using the B mode, I can ease off the throttle and bring it to a complete stop. And apparently Rolls-Royce then, without letting you know, once you get under about 3 kilometers an hour, the brakes are gently kicking in to bring you to the perfect stop. Because even if you don't have someone drinking champagne in the back, it's nice to stop in a perfect way. In fact, everything must be perfect in your Rolls-Royce. The other thing worth mentioning is the stereo, which is, well, it's so wonderful it makes you want to cry. Rolls-Royce developed their own, they do their own speakers, and the designers work with the audio engineers all the way through to make sure that the metal in the doors and the frames and the use of aluminium, that everything has a resonant quality to it that will help the stereo when it's built. Then they map out the interior and so on. I have to say I would never buy a Rolls-Royce myself to drive because it's just not me and I wouldn't feel good driving around in one. But I would buy one to park in my garage and sit in it and just listen to music all day. I mean, that's a good way to spend $800,000, right? Now the waftability, the ride is quite something. And for something this heavy, there's very little porpoising, which you might expect. There's almost no body roll, which is freakish. But the way that it can ride over rough bits of road as if they're not there, very Rolls-Royce. That's another thing they're very good at. And of course, you'd expect that. So when they showed this vehicle to their many, many well-heeled customers, all of whom apparently have been waiting for an electric vehicle their whole lives anxiously, buying Teslas out of desperation because they couldn't get a roller one, when they showed it to those customers, they said, it has to be one thing. It has to be a Rolls-Royce. A Rolls-Royce first, an electric vehicle second. And this is very much pure Rolls-Royce. From the ting-ting. Ooh, I got it, my fingernails are finally working. From the ting-ting to the steering, to the way it goes, to the silence. Everything about it is pure Rolls-Royce. And I quite like the look of it as well. I think it looks a bit plain and dull from the back. They say it looks like the hull of a boat. But I love the front of it. It looks fantastic coming up in the mirrors behind you. It's intimidating, it's thrusting. It's really got a road presence like very few things have. But to drive, it really is something. I think more so than any other electric vehicle I've driven, it is a perfect replacement for what they already had. A Taycan is not a replacement for a Porsche 911. It's a different kind of Porsche. But the Spectre feels very much like a V12 Rolls-Royce without the burning of the petrol. And of course, Rolls-Royce owners are quite happy never to visit a petrol station again because there are ordinary people there who wants to be near them. The Spectre drives just like a Rolls-Royce, like they always have. And torque, instantaneous torque, has always been their thing. Effortless thrust, and yet thrust with silence. An engine you could never hear. What have they got now? An electric motor you can never hear. It's like they knew this was coming, like 123 years ago. The Spectre is rated at 520 kilometres on the WLTP scale, but Rolls claims it can go much further than that, like 600 kilometres. Efficiency is claimed to be 21.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres. On the launch we drove 210 kilometres and had 300 kilometres of indicated range left at the end, which is pretty close to their claim. The Spectre can be charged at up to 200 kilowatts on a DC fast charger, on which it will take 35 minutes to go from 10 to 80% charge. On a typical 11 kilowatt home system, it will take 10 hours and 45 minutes to go from 0 to 90% charge. The Spectre has not been crash tested to ANCAP, nor is it likely they'll hand one over for such a thing. Its safety offerings include active cruise control, lane change assist, active lane centering, lane departure with active steer, a reversing assistant which I like. It also features collision warning and active braking. Rolls tells us the Spectre has 4 airbags and does not need more, so that's good news. Check out my full written review at carsguide.com.au for all the details. Now I would assume you get a lifetime warranty at Rolls prices, but I'd be wrong. You only get 4 years, but it is unlimited mileage. The Spectre's battery is covered by a 10-year warranty. An extended service and warranty package is to be confirmed. Rolls also offers 24/7 roadside assistance, and if your battery goes flat, the company will take your Spectre to the nearest charging station for you. Another touch I really like is what they call a regional flying doctor, who is on standby 24/7 in extreme cases if your Spectre fails to proceed. Fails to proceed is the Rolls-Royce euphemism for breaking down. I have to say it's probably my favourite electric car. In terms of turning something that already existed as a wonderful combustion engine vehicle into an electric vehicle, the Rolls-Royce somehow makes more sense than most. And buyers have voted in large numbers. Rolls tells me that orders are much more ferocious than they'd expected, and they're having to make more. The most incredible figure though is that 40% of those buyers are new to the brand. It's like they've been waiting their whole life refusing to buy a Rolls-Royce until they made an electric vehicle. And of course, it probably makes sense to them because they never want to go to a fuel station again. They don't mind electric cars because someone else will plug it in for them. And if they want to drive further than 530 kilometres, they've probably got 20 other cars to do it in. So, the Spectre, it makes a lot of sense.